Welcome to Psychoanalysis You, the official podcast of the American Psychoanalytic Association. I'm your host, Dr. Gail Saltz. The American Psychoanalytic Association is the largest U.S. member organization of professional psychoanalysts, and this podcast will highlight the work of various member analysts and how that work can be of use to you in your day-to-day life. So my guest today is Sue Kolod, who is president of the North American Psychoanalytic Confederation, and she is a supervising and training analyst at the William Alanson White Institute. She's a member at large on the board of the American Psychoanalytic Association, and since 2021, she has been co-leading a group called the Depolarization Project.
Yes.
And this is pretty fascinating to me and so timely, as I think we've seen this incredible rise in polarization really, in this nation, but really all over the world. So this is a hot topic, and we've seen the negative effects of polarization. And so I wondered first if you could maybe speak to, well, what got you interested in this topic and forming this group? And what is the concern that made you think, hey, we need to think about this?
Well, I've been interested in this topic for a very long time. I don't need to go all the way back to my childhood and family, but I will say that the moment that sticks out for me that it became a question was when I was on a policy-making body at my institute, William Alanson White, and we were discussing the training analyst issue. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine told me that she saw someone who was on the other side of the issue as she was walking down the street, and she ran into a grocery store to avoid her. And I was really fascinated by that. It felt so toxic. The topic, which, it is a hot topic at psychoanalytic institutes, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not, it's not something that is, something dangerous, that this friend of mine felt that she had to run away from this person. So that's the thing that got me really interested to begin with. That was, about 15 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But then after that, the body itself, the policy-making body, the Council of Fellows, was a very, very polarized group about all kinds of issues. And I became the chair of the Council of Fellows and felt that I had to find a way to get people to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And I hired an executive coach from the group relations sphere who helped me. And there was one phrase she used very frequently, and that was, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So that was kind of my mantra as I was chairing the Council of Fellows. Then it came into even sharper focus when I was chairing a panel at a conference of the International Psychoanalytic Association in 2021 at the height of the pandemic. It was supposed to be in Vancouver, and because of travel restrictions, we had to do it online. The topic was mask refusal, conspiracy theories, and annihilation anxiety. And during the Q&A section, a number of people in the audience, this was an audience of entirely psychoanalysts, some people in the audience commented that we, psychoanalysts, had a lot to offer to help alleviate toxic polarization. And my colleague, Chris Heath, who was an analyst from Dallas, and I were kind of like, really? We're not really sure because the field is so polarized. We have some wonderful concepts that, in theory, should be very effective if you could use them.
Yes. But
we don't seem to be able to use them very well among ourselves. So we had some question as to whether that was really the case. So we formed this group. We call it the Depolarization Project. This was in 2021. It's still going on. We meet once a month. And we have 8 members. 4 of them are psychoanalysts, and 4 of them are people from other fields. We have someone who, very interesting person, an architect who designs museums and monuments. He designed the World Trade Center Memorial, Tom Hennis. We have a a psychoanalyst who herself runs groups with MAGA people, having dialogues with them, Alice Mayer, a woman named Lori Ammon, me. That's the four psychoanalysts. And then we have two lawyers, one who's extremely progressive and the other who's a Trump supporter.
Okay.
And, Tom, I mentioned him. He's one of the non-analysts. Oh, and then Chris is the fourth analyst. So we have Tom, we have Alice, Alex, and Sean. Alex and Sean are the two.
So the idea is it is a polarized group.
It's a polarized group. We purposely didn't want to make it too homogenous. And we read all kinds of literature, not just psychoanalytic. We read literature from behavioral economics and social psychology and law, mediation work. And we've also read things that have been very polarized in the field, such as the book by Lara and Stephen Sheeha, Psychoanalysis Under Occupation. We've read Gender Without Identity by Sakatopoulou and Pellegrini. We've read Frantz Fanon. But then we've also read Václav Havel, Eric Fromm. Who was the person Cass Sunstein has been, we started out reading Cass Sunstein. He's a behavioral economist from Harvard who has a lot of interesting ideas about how people become polarized, how they change. And we try to pay a lot of attention to how polarization can occur within our group and to address it. And it does occur sometimes.
And are you trying to glean specific, maybe let's say psychoanalytic tools that seem replicable in terms of dealing with polarization? Is that part of the task of the group?
Well, I guess the most obvious thing is that we are trained to be able to engage with people, our patients, who we may have very different points of view, and they may evoke all kinds of negative feelings in us that might make us feel like we might want to retaliate or withdraw. Those are the two main things people seem to do when they're faced with someone whose opinions they can't stand. And we learn how to deal with those feelings, how to process them, how to use them, how to try to help us to understand why that person feels the way they do, how to use empathy to put ourselves in their place. So those are all things that we should be capable of doing, but somehow when it comes to the group and not the individual, they sort of evaporate.
Yeah. Can you back up for a second and kind of how would you define toxic polarization?
Well, yeah, you could just say polarization. I think of toxic polarization when it reaches a point where you cannot talk to the other person. And there have been a number of incidents, political occurrences that literally there has been a point of view within different psychoanalytic groups where people said, I don't think we should talk about this at all because it's too toxic. So that's what I think of as toxic polarization, when you no longer can't stand to listen to the other person. You can't stand to be around that person.
You run into the grocery store.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. And so, in the broader world, right, there's lots of discussion about this all the time, sort of how do we get together? What do we do if we're married to somebody for whom we feel, our views have diverged so that it's become toxic? How do we go home to that Thanksgiving dinner and sit with relatives where we feel their viewpoint is, and this is the thing that I'm curious about, I don't know if you've discussed this in the group or how psychoanalytically to view this. People, if you ask them sort of, why can't you just agree to disagree? Right? Why can't there be like, I disagree with you, intensely so. I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. We're going to agree to disagree. It seems very hard for people to do that. People often will cite something to the effect of, if that person believes this, and that belief channels into, let's say, a vote or in some way moves society in that direction, it harms me. It harms me. And people will sort of underneath say that is the aspect of the polarization that makes them feel like fleeing or taking up arms. how would a psychoanalyst approach, or how should we be approaching that kind of situation that occurs all the time?
Well, first of all, I would say that in order to address it effectively, the two people involved or the two groups involved have to buy into the idea that they want to talk to each other. That's absolutely essential, which is why I've never really been a proponent of town hall meetings, because I think, people don't have very much skin in the game and they feel like they can just say whatever they want. Or the worst example are psychoanalytic listservs. It's almost like road rage. There's a certain degree of anonymity, so feeling like you could say anything, you can make ad hominem attacks. So that's one of the things in our group.
And you're saying the problem with that is that the people doing it because of the anonymity aren't invested in being able to have a continued conversation with those people and a continued relationship with those people.
Yes. Well, and so, for example, everyone in the group has made a commitment to hang in there, even if it gets really uncomfortable. That's one of the conditions of being part of the group. And we have a rule that you have to come to all the meetings. I mean, we're not crazy about it. If you have something that you have to do, you don't have to be there, but you have to make a commitment to try to come to all the meetings. And we did have one person who quit, which I think is kind of interesting. What happened? This was one of the younger members. He was identified as Marxist and non-binary, and there were all kinds of reasons why it was problematic. One being that he lived in Asia, and the time difference just made it very, very difficult. But he just became enraged and he quit, and he didn't want to come back and discuss it, which we were angry about, because we felt the very least he should be willing to process it with us, why he couldn't stand to be with the group. But after he left, a number of the members reached out to him, and little by little, I wouldn't say he's back in the group, but he kind of approaches us, and when there's a topic that he really wants to engage in or something that he really wants, he has a strong opinion about, sometimes he will join us, and we make it an exception for him because we feel like we're committed to him, and he has shown some degree of commitment to us, so we feel that we want to allow him that flexibility that we don't really allow the other members.
Would that translate into, let's say, the real world? That would you recommend, as it were, there are people you might make exceptions for because you feel you have a relationship with them and you don't want that relationship to end. And so, as a mental health professional, I guess I'm sort of getting at, as mental health professional, what is it that you've gleaned from participating in this group that we can impart to people who are listening and thinking, some things really enrage me, and then I choose to step away, or I choose to run into the grocery store? How much is it about being willing to listen even when you intensely disagree or having all kinds of feelings about it? How much is it?
There's some concepts that we have encountered that we found to be really helpful. The work of Vamik Volkan in particular is somebody that I've found to be extremely useful. He talks about your large group identity and chosen traumas and chosen glories. And to me, this is something that we don't really think about. We talk about the transgenerational transmission of trauma, but he talks about it in a different way, that you are brought up with certain points of view, things that you associate positively with home, with your family, with your family's history, stories that were told to you that make a huge impact on you without you even realizing about it. But that oftentimes when things get to a point where you feel like you can't stand to be around the other person, it's because it's touching that.
So while it seems like polarization, it's actually not polarization at all, right? It's really, you're both coming from the same response to a traumatic history.
Exactly. It results in polarization. And I think
that's a big theme of sort of understanding of this group, of how to, in terms of how to deal with polarization. It is, can you help larger groups to tap into their own reasoning and personal need to feel so polarized about a topic and to be curious enough about the other to have that same, maybe they also have some sort of experience that's driving their opinion.
Well, that's the reaction I get when I talk about this to groups. I talked to a number of psychoanalytic groups about this. And, the feelings that lead to that, that self-protective defense that develops into polarization and then toxic polarization is almost always connected with mourning. Volkan says we are defined by how we mourn, which I think is a very profound thought.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So in that sense, if people were more able to think about the other side as also responding to some loss that they experience, whether you experience that loss or you agree with, you see, people are defining, you shouldn't experience that as a loss. It's not true or it's no big deal or whatever, but that they are.
Right.
They
it doesn't matter
are.
what you think about whether they should experience it that way. That is the way they experience it. And we can do that with our patients. We do that all the time. They're talking about something and I'm thinking, why is this upsetting them so much? It seems so trivial. But then if, of course you don't say that, you try to understand, why is this so important to the person? And it's always connected to something that is important to them, that's fundamental to them.
So one thing that I'd like to ask you about is that it seems often that leaders of a group become leaders, or at least people follow them because they have tapped into the loss that group has experienced.
Well, that's certainly the case in the United States right now, yes.
In many places, actually, I think.
Yes,
but,
it's happening.
But it certainly seems the case here. Has your group sort of brainstormed along the same lines of when that happens and the polarization results in what feels like harms to the group who are not the followers? What are ways of thinking about that in a way that mitigates, what feel like the harms that are occurring?
Well, I think that there's a huge difference between dealing with people people that you actually can see and talk to versus what you read about in the newspaper.
That's true.
I wouldn't presume to give advice to world leaders. I feel like what I can deal with are groups of people that are upset about the fact that they can't talk to each other.
Yes. I guess some of this is, they can't talk to each other. They can't talk to each other because of, I think, their defense mechanisms that they're using. Maybe you could elucidate some of those that your group has found to be an issue, things like splitting.
Well, yes, splitting and projection. I mean, I love this example. This was not in my group. It was with patients, but I had two patients back to back. One of them was, they were both Jewish. One of them was a zealous pro-Palestinian. The other one was completely supportive of Netanyahu. And they both felt that they were absolutely 100% correct. They'd never been so clear about anything in their entire life. And I saw them one after the other, and it was such an interesting experience.
Yeah. And while you're with them, you can see their point of view.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Completely.
Yes.
Is it make it difficult to hold another point of view while you're sitting with them?
I tried to question, it didn't get very far to question why the person was so adamant about it. What was all the emotion behind it? Because to directly address that was kind of like to negate their experience. But I did ask them, as we always did, about their family history to try to understand why this particular situation was, what was it tapping into for that person?
So it was less about the opinion than its data about them.
Right.
And that's
Right,
really
right,
what
right.
you're doing in the treatment.
Yes.
So what are the ways that things like large group identity, chosen trauma, some of the concepts that you say are at play in polarization, can you explain them and how they come to bear on particularly toxic polarization?
Well, maybe one of the ways I can explain them is through some experiences that I've had, that you can get a group of people together, a small group of people who are committed to talking to each other and to solving a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, two groups, psychoanalytic groups that were at odds with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to solve that problem, and you get them together. And, there might be some tension, but they want to reach a compromise, and they are able to reach a compromise. And it's kind of almost like magic. It feels like their humanity is what comes through. But then when the delegation goes back to their group and the delegation goes back to their group, that it feels like they've been traitorous. They've gone over to the other side.
That they were willing to compromise.
Yes. So the way I see it is that the small group forms an identity when it's together. But when you go back to the large group identity, the identity that has to do with the history of your institute and your training and your training analyst and, the whole experience you had there takes over. And I think that happens a lot, especially when in times like this, when there's so much anxiety and stress that people cling to each other and they own, like what you see on social media, they only want to hear and read points of view that they agree with. Because it's too scary to read, or maybe they read the other points of view because they want to get scared and they want to be outraged, not because they want to consider them. So I think that it's absolutely essential that human contact has to be there, and the desire to try to understand the point of view of the other. There's no point in trying to preach to people that you should listen to each other. People have to want to.
Well, they can't, I guess what you're bringing up is they can't want to if they feel anxious about that any movement from or any presentation of another view threatens their very identity, right? If their identity is I'm team A, then I don't want to hear anything, or it's not that I don't want to hear anything. I want to only be outraged and other ways of being distanced from what the other team thinks, because it threatens who I really am. So it would seem to me that psychoanalysts have ways to, I guess, process, think about, or give insight into that anxiety about identity and needing to stay very circumscribed and not have, sort of something that would interrupt that.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the role of the leader. That's something I've gotten very interested in because, like you said, there are many leaders that we can think of around the world that seems to exploit this kind of fear right now.
Yes.
And then maybe we can think of some leaders, maybe locally, people who are trying to bring people together. And I think that it comes from the top down. If you have somebody that you feel safe, that nothing horrible is going to happen if people talk to each other, that's an environment in which the leader can affect a change in which the polarization can be reduced. Now, Cass Sunstein has a concept that we really love in our group. It's called the surprising validator.
What
A
does that mean?
surprising validator is someone who looks like you, who seems like you, who has a lot of commonality with you, has a similar history, but they have a point of view that is in opposition to the one that you're holding on to. And that when a person runs into somebody like that, it takes them back a bit, and they say, if that person thinks X, maybe I need to think about that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I felt a little bit that way about reading Shiha. That was one of the reasons why I felt like I had to explore it a little bit, because I really admire and trust all the people in my group.
Yes.
And the fact that a couple of them were so taken back by it. One of them said they thought it was breathtaking. I felt like, and this is somebody I really respect, who I think is similar to me. So I was like, I have to take what he's saying seriously. So that's a surprising validator. And Cass Sunstein says that's how people change, not by learning all the facts and studying, because all that does is you find the facts that you want to support your point of view.
We all got confirmation bias.
Right,
and we all take in what we
Yes.
feel comfortable taking in and concurs with us. And of course, there has been a lot of looking at, how can you change the mind of a conspiracy theorist, and that it really is only those that have a relationship where there is a lot of trust have even a modicum of chance of. So it sort of speaks to what you're saying, that that you trust these people in your group. So if they, wholeheartedly endorse something, it did make you feel like I have to examine that, as
Yes,
opposed
exactly.
to some other, or somebody by email or something that where you don't have that kind of trusting relationship.
Yeah, that's why we feel like we need to have people in the group that we don't agree with.
In order to practice this, in order to see how this can actually work. So you've created this petri dish
Yes.
of the experience, and you're finding over time, I gather, that really you can make your way through this polarization.
Yes, it really feels that way. And some of the things that have happened in the group have been really surprising, when people seem to be completely at odds with each other and get really angry at each other. I can think of a couple of times. And then when they got a little bit more curious about the other person and asked them some questions, and they realized they didn't disagree as much as they thought they did.
What allowed them to have that moment of, I'm going to calm down now and get more curious? Because, of course, in that moment, in that flash of anger, that's hard to do. That's what we're seeing all around us, right? People being so angry that it sort of floods their emotional experience, and there isn't really room for curiosity or anything else. What did you find in the group would allow someone to sort of settle enough to be able to do that?
Well, I can't remember exactly, but I can say more generally, there was a point of contact, something that they agreed about. And it was like, I think it was protecting vulnerable people. There is a group that I really admired the work that they've done. It's called the Boston Conversations Project. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
This occurred in Boston after a number of abortion clinics were bombed, and several people were killed. And a group of, I'm going to say, pro-choice and pro-life. I'm not saying anti-abortion, because that's not the way they identified themselves.
Okay.
Pro-life and pro-choice.
Okay.
Women got together, leaders in their community, and they met together secretly for 5 years. They didn't tell anybody about it, because they were concerned about going back to their group. And, how can you talk to those people? So the first thing that they needed to do was to define terms that they could both live with. I mean, obviously, this group was very committed to trying to
work something
out. And so the first thing they had to decide was what they were going to call what grows inside of a woman. And the pro-choice women would not agree to fetus. And
no, they must have agreed to fetus. They wouldn't probably agree to baby or child or...
Wait, let me get it straight. Yeah. The pro-choice women wanted to say baby.
They wanted to say baby. The pro-choice...
I'm sorry, I'm getting confused here.
The pro-life women wanted to say baby, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure.
All right, yeah.
And probably the pro-choice people wanted to say fetus.
They wanted to say fetus. Thank you.
Yes.
So this went on for a while. They couldn't decide. I think they finally decided on human fetus. And neither side liked that.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
They were both willing to agree to it. And over time, nobody changed their mind, which was really interesting, even though that they felt that the project was very successful.
They did.
Because they had respect for each other and they cared about each other, and they worried about each other's safety. So the dehumanization that occurs when there's rampant polarization evaporated. These were people who really cared about each other. They also found significant areas of overlap. They wanted to reduce unwanted pregnancies, especially in teens. They all agreed they didn't want to see women forced into having an abortion. So there was a number of things that they agreed upon, and that's what held them together.
So technically, if you can live in the Venn diagram of the two groups, right?
Yes.
In the overlapping, that finding those commonalities is somewhat of a antidote to the polarization, in the sense that you might not agree, but you don't have to run into the grocery store. You can operate together and maintain a relationship and look for things that feel like the greater good for both of you.
Exactly. So, for example, a group that feels like it's going to break apart, it's very motivating to not want to break apart. So, like issues that come up in analytic institutes, the group may really want to stay together.
Right.
So finding the things that they have in common is a very motivating force.
Sure.
To be able to sit with uncomfortable feelings and listen to the point of view of the other person.
So to avoid the loss of the relationship, if we go back to loss, right? To avoid that loss. Where does the issue of chosen trauma come to play, and what is meant by that?
All right. Well, we actually had Vamik Volkan come to our group. He's in his 90s.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And he corrected me about what a chosen trauma was, because I used the example that I gave about my grandmother, and I said that that without realizing that had become my chosen trauma. And he explained to me that chosen trauma has to be something that happened so long ago, there's nobody alive still. And he used the example that comes to my mind. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I was one of the only Jewish people in the town. And there were a few times in which I was called a Christ killer. So that, to me, that's a really good example of a chosen trauma.
So because the people involved with that's so long ago, they're not there anymore.
Right. So this group that I felt attacked by, or I was being attacked by,
yes,
their chosen trauma was that the Jews killed Christ.
Ah, I see. So really, that it is, even if it's just is that your chosen trauma?
No, that would not be my chosen trauma. The example that he uses, and I may not be able to remember exactly the name of it, but it's a battle that occurred in Serbia in 1389.
Okay.
In which I think that the Christians were trying to get the Ottomans to leave, and the Ottomans lost. The Ottomans won, and there was a martyr involved in this, and they celebrate a holiday every year. And Slobodan Milosevic exploited this in the 1980s when he came into power, and he activated the attack on the Muslims, which resulted in the genocide.
So the invoking of this chosen trauma,
a humiliation, let's say,
right? That this happened and is a possibility. We are threatened by this historic trauma because it's a possibility,
right? That this still lives in us,
yes,
somehow,
yes.
And the chosen glories are the victories,
Okay, interesting. And so, in what way does your group see this playing into polarization?
Well, I can speak about myself. Again, even though technically what I was experiencing with the story about my grandmother was not a chosen trauma, because my mother was still alive at that point.
Okay.
So, but this was something that I held very close to me, very personally, without even being aware of it, that motivated my reaction to what was going on around me. I think of it as if you think about countertransference that you're unaware of, I think of chosen trauma as it is a trauma that you hold inside of you that you may not have experienced yourself, but you experienced it as part of a large group. So it's connected with large group identity. So you could say that that is the countertransference of your large group identity, is your chosen traumas and your chosen glories.
So perhaps you would say that, for example, anybody who's the descendant in any way of, say, a Holocaust survivor may view the Holocaust may be their chosen trauma, assuming they're, at this point, right? I mean, there are very few survivors anymore of that time, but there are, families where there are, generations of people who escaped and but lost family or needed to escape. That represents a chosen trauma for them.
But interestingly, there are people that have Holocaust histories. They're the descendants of Holocaust survivors who are very, very adamant about supporting the Palestinians because they feel that the Germans never stood up for the Jews and that we have to stand up for the Palestinians. So it can go the other way too.
Yes. So it's a matter of but it's still, it's a trauma of persecution, right? It's a trauma of eradication. It's a trauma of causing suffering specifically because you're a people's. And that could be, transferred to any group, really.
Yes. So, this is something that we try to understand in our group when things come up that are polarizing. Like, what is this touching on in you with your history, with your family history, with your national history, whatever?
So really, in this sense, psychoanalytic principles are really important to understanding.
Yeah, to me, this
polarization.
is completely...
It's everything.
Yeah, completely psychoanalytic.
Yeah. And so is your group trying to take these ideas, or is there a plan to take these ideas and sort of, impart them to a larger group, to, whether it's a larger group of psychoanalysts or mental health professionals or to, our nation at large, that there are tools and ways of understanding polarization that can allow us to continue having relationships?
Well, I would say that some of the people in the group have bigger plans than other people.
Okay.
There's one person in the group that really wants to take these ideas and feels that it could change the world. I'm not at that level.
Okay.
I think that the person I mentioned, who's the architect who creates monuments, actually uses these concepts in
creating.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, so I think he has a shot at actually making a big impact. He mentioned to me that when he was doing the World Trade Center Memorial, he wanted to present the Muslim point of view, and he was not permitted to do so by the builders. But he always tries to incorporate all the different points of view. It's in the way the building is structured.
Sure,
it's really fascinating what he's doing.
That is fascinating.
Yeah,
that is fascinating. Well, let's hope that ultimately there is some further understanding, and people listen and think about this as they go about their daily lives and who they can talk with and who they can't talk with, and the tools that psychoanalysis has to offer.
I'm hoping so.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me, Gail.
Thank you for listening in today. We at the American Psychoanalytic Association hope to introduce you to the many ways psychoanalytic thought affects the world around us, and especially you, through this podcast. We would love to hear your thoughts, questions, and requests. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Follow APSA on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or X at psychoanalysis_ with the hashtag APSA podcast. And feel free to send a question or comment. You can find more information about the American Psychoanalytic Association by going to www.apsa.org and listen to more episodes and find bios of our guests online at apsa.org/podcast. If you found this episode useful, please share with a friend or colleague. And we will be back next month with another episode of Psychoanalysis and You. I'm Dr. Gail Saltz, and it's been my pleasure to be your host of Psychoanalysis and You. And now for some Freudian quickies. You sent in your questions for an analyst. I grabbed an analyst with an answer. Till next time. What do psychoanalysts talk about when they gather?
They talk about their friends in common, their colleagues, what they're doing, what they think, what they should think. And mostly, these are people who share a common experience that's kind of uncommon in the general population. I think we really thrive on supporting each other in our unusual roles.
They talk about all the same things that other people talk about when they gather, but they also talk about psychoanalysis.
It depends on which psychoanalysts are getting together. One thing that they can be really good at is listening.
Oh my God, that's a great question to ask today. I just had someone here visiting who's not part of the conference and was just like, I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to know what my therapist is talking about with a therapist. But I mean, we talk about cases that are on our mind that are staying with us after the hour is over. We talk about prestige television from HBO, talk about good meals we had in the last week. And honestly, those are my top 3.
Does insurance ever pay for a 5 times a week psychoanalysis?
Yes.
I don't know the answer. No.
That's fair.
It may. It depends on, obviously, the insurance company and a bunch of logistical details, but I've found that actually it isn't so uncommon to be able to get even a 4 times a week treatment covered by insurance. I haven't seen a case with 5 times a week, but I think that it's likely that in certain cases that would be covered.
Resonate.